The Tycoon's Reckoning. A Love Reborn. Get ready for a surprising love story that will touch your heart. Leave your thoughts in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. Join our community. A cold accusation. The city outside Ethan Vance's office pulsed with light and ambition. But inside the glass tower that housed his global pharmaceutical empire, everything felt sharp, cold, and controlled. He stood by the massive window of his Manhattan office, gazing at a skyline that had long ceased to impress him. His blonde hair was perfectly coiffed, his blue eyes unreadable. His tailored suit clung to his body like armor. Ethan was 36, a self-made billionaire, revered in business circles and feared by his competitors. Emotion to him was inefficient, trust was a luxury, and mistakes were unforgivable. The email arrived just before 7 p.m., marked urgent by his head of internal audit. Discrepancies in financial reports, flagged transactions, tens of thousands discreetly moved over several months. A preliminary investigation had narrowed the search to someone in his personal circle. When he opened the final attachment and saw the name, Clara Miller, highlighted in red, something inside him hardened. His jaw tightened, and without pausing to consider alternatives, he picked up his phone and dialed her number. Clara arrived at the penthouse that night to find the door already ajar. She stepped in cautiously, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor, sensing the tension before she saw him. He stood in the living room, her name already cold on his lips. "I trusted you," he said without greeting, "and you've been stealing from me." She stood motionless, her dark hair loosely tied back, her eyes widening in disbelief. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play innocent," he spat. "Accounting records show missing funds, transfers traced to your access credentials." She took a step forward, her hand slightly raised, as if approaching a wild animal. "Ethan, I don't know what they found, but I didn't take anything. I never would." "No," he interrupted. "You're not just anyone. You lived here. You had access to my life, and you used it." His voice was clipped, his breathing shallow. "Do you think I'd betray you like that? I think the evidence speaks for itself." She stared at him, stunned. For a moment, something flickered behind her eyes. Not anger, not panic, just quiet devastation. "I thought you knew me better," she whispered. "Clearly not," he retorted. The silence that followed was unbearable, the seconds before a storm. She didn't cry, didn't plead. She simply turned and walked to the bedroom, gathered her belongings into a small travel bag, and returned without a word. As she passed him, he didn't move. He didn't ask her to stay. He didn't even look at her. At the door, she paused. "One day, you'll realize what you lost." Then she left. The latch clicked shut behind her, definitive and resonant. Ethan remained motionless, his fists clenched at his sides. He didn't speak to anyone else that night. He didn't reread the reports or ask for clarification. He told himself he had done the right thing, cutting out the rot before it spread. But something didn't quite fit. Not guilt. Something colder, heavier. Something like silence. What he didn't know was that Clara hadn't just walked out with a suitcase that night. She had walked out carrying 2 lips inside her, still small and silent, growing beneath her heart. And by the time he came to question what had truly happened, it would be too late to stop the story from unfolding. In that moment, do you think Ethan truly believed Clara was guilty? Or was there something else at play? Share your initial thoughts in the comments. A glimpse of the unthinkable. 4 years had passed, but Ethan never allowed himself to go back to that night. He buried it, as he buried everything that made him feel insecure, underachievements, quarterly results, and endless projects. Clara's name never crossed his lips, either publicly or privately. According to the world, she had disappeared, and Ethan had moved on. But something of the silence she left behind had never quite stopped following him. It lingered in the spaces she used to fill, on the untouched side of the bed, in the music she used to play in the mornings, in the way he no longer let anyone get close to him. Now, in early spring 2025, Ethan was in Boston for a corporate gala, representing his company's expansion into biotech research. It was the kind of event he had attended 100 times. Stiff conversations, expensive wine, predictable compliments from people who needed his signature. After 3 hours of polite smiles and rehearsed speeches, he slipped away early and walked alone to the sidewalk, phone in hand, ready to call his chauffeur. That's when he saw her. Clara stood under the glow of a street lamp a few yards away, trying to pull a toy from her bag while 2 small girls clung to each side of her. At first, Ethan froze, thinking the resemblance was playing tricks on him. But it wasn't a mistake. It was her. Her posture, the shape of her face, the gentleness with which she knelt to zip up one of the girls' jackets. It was undeniably her. And the girls. They were around 3, maybe a little older. Identical. Small, giggling, clutching stuffed animals. Both had soft blonde curls and large blue eyes. His blue eyes. He didn't move. He couldn't. The world around him faded as he stared, his breath caught between his lungs and his throat. One of the girls looked up and stared at him for a fleeting second. She blinked slowly, curiously. Then she looked back at her mother without a word. Clara straightened and followed her daughter's gaze. Their eyes met. She didn't gasp. She didn't stumble. She just looked at him with a calm, unreadable expression, as if she had prepared for this moment and was already done with it. Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came out. Before he could find anything to say, Clara gently ushered the girls into a nearby taxi. She didn't rush. She didn't look back. The car door closed with a soft thud, and a moment later, the cab pulled away into the night. 2 small faces pressed against the window, watching the city blur around them. Ethan remained motionless, completely still, as people walked past him on the sidewalk, oblivious that his world had just shifted. He wasn't sure how long he stood there before his chauffeur pulled up and asked if he was ready to leave. He nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on the street where the taxi had disappeared. Something inside him, something he had buried 4 years ago, had just surfaced, and he knew, without needing anyone to confirm it, that he had just seen his daughters for the first time. A painful confrontation. Ethan couldn't sleep that night. He paced his hotel suite, replaying the scene marathon over and over in his mind. Clara under the street lamp, the twins by her side, the fleeting moment their eyes had met, and the expression on her face. Not surprise, not regret, not anger, just a quiet distance. He could still see the way the little girl had looked at him, the slight, curious tilt of her head, as if staring into a mirror that made no sense. He needed no proof. The girls were his. He knew it in a way that transcended logic and went straight to the part of him that had been empty for 4 years. By morning, he had made his decision. He didn't contact her directly. He knew she wouldn't respond, not after what had happened. Instead, he hired someone. Discreet. A private investigator he had worked with before. He didn't want surveillance or pressure, just an address. Something simple. Something human. In 3 days, he had it. A modest townhouse in a quiet area of Cambridge. Nothing extravagant. Not the kind of place Ethan imagined Clara would end up. But perhaps that was the point. She had rebuilt her life without him. It was a Tuesday afternoon. He didn't tell anyone at the office. He didn't even tell his chauffeur. He took a rental car, parked down the street, and sat for nearly 20 minutes, staring at the small front yard, watching toys strewn across the lawn, chalk drawings on the sidewalk, a tricycle overturned on its side, a small pair of shoes near the steps. It was a life, a full, beautiful life that he wasn't a part of. Finally, he got out and walked to the door. When she opened it, she didn't seem surprised. She looked tired, as if she had known this moment would come and had prepared for it. "Ethan," she said simply. "I need to talk to you," he replied. His voice was calm, but inside, everything was shaking. Clara didn't invite him in. She stepped outside and closed the door softly behind her, the sound of children's laughter muffled in the background. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I saw you, at the restaurant, the girls. They're my daughters," she said, her tone firm. "They're mine too," he said, and she didn't correct him. For a moment she studied him. He looked tired, but not in the same way he used to when they were together. It was a different kind of exhaustion, as if he had been walking through life on autopilot and had just woken up. "Why now?" she asked. "Because I didn't know," he said. "If I had known—" "You didn't want to know," she interrupted him. "You were so quick to believe I was a thief. You didn't even let me speak. I made a mistake. You destroyed everything we had. I was pregnant when you threw me out, Ethan. I was carrying your children, and you didn't even look back." The words hit him like cold water. He felt it in his chest, a weight so profound it was hard to breathe. "I'm not here to justify what I did," he said after a long pause. "I just want to make things right. Somehow. And what does that look like to you? Money? Lawyers? A press release? No, I want to be their father." Clara looked down, took a deep breath, and then met his eyes. "They don't know you. They haven't even heard your name. You can't just show up and claim a title you never earned." "Then let me earn it," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Let me start." She didn't answer immediately. The door behind her creaked slightly, and one of the girls peeked out. Clara turned and gently ushered her back inside. When she turned back to Ethan, her face had softened slightly. "I don't promise anything, but if you really want to do this, you start with them, not with me." "I understand." "Ethan," she added, her voice suddenly sharper, "don't do this halfway. If you come in, you stay in." He nodded slowly. The full gravity of what she meant settled in his bones. This wasn't a gesture. It wasn't something fixed with a check or an apology. If he wanted to be in their lives, he had to earn it with time, with presence, with patience. She backed towards the door. "Come back Saturday. We'll be at the park 2 blocks over, at 10 a.m. Before he could respond, she slipped inside. The door clicked shut behind her. Ethan stood there for a long time, motionless, staring at the spot where she had just been. For the first time in 4 years, he felt something unfamiliar. Humility, and beneath that, a flicker of hope. What do you think Clara means by, "If you come in, you stay in"? What challenges do you foresee for Ethan in earning their trust? Share your predictions in the comments. A tentative beginning in the park. The playground was small, tucked between 2 apartment buildings with a faded wooden fence and the scent of spring in the air. Ethan arrived 10 minutes early, dressed in jeans and a sweater he hadn't worn in years, unsure if he was overdressed or not dressed enough. He stood awkwardly near a bench, hands in his pockets, scanning the area like someone who had wandered into a place meant for someone else. Children ran in circles, their laughter bright and free. Parents chatted nearby while sipping coffee from paper cups. Ethan felt like an intruder, a man out of place, amidst strollers and sidewalk chalk. Exactly. At 10 o'clock, he saw them. Clara approached with a slow, even gait, one hand gently holding each of the girls. They wore matching pastel jackets. Their blonde curls bounced with each step, and their little sneakers lit up as they walked. They looked around, wide-eyed, taking in the playground as if it were a new world. When they reached the gate, Clara knelt and whispered something to them. Both girls nodded, then cautiously let go of her hands and headed for the sandbox. She joined Ethan on the bench, keeping a little space between them. She didn't speak at first. Neither did he. They just sat there, both watching the two girls dig and build with plastic shovels, working silently side by side as twins often do, as if sharing a private language no one else could fully understand. "They don't know who you are yet," Clara finally said. Her voice was low, almost muffled by the sounds of play around them. "To them, you're just a man from the street, a stranger." "I understand," Ethan said, his eyes still on the girls. "I don't expect anything. You'll have to be patient. They're smart, observant, but they don't trust easily." He nodded. "They're yours, so you'll be your." Clara glanced at him. "They're ours. You just didn't want to know it before." "I was wrong," he said simply. "And I'm sorry. I can't undo it. But I want to show them something different now. Show you." Silence settled between them again, but it didn't feel as heavy as before. One of the girls, Sky, Clara had texted him, toddled closer, watching Ethan from a distance. He crouched to her level, careful not to get too close, and smiled. "Hi," he said softly. She didn't respond. She just stared at him with an expression of serious concentration, as if measuring the shape of his face, the color of his eyes, the way his voice sounded. "Want help with your sandcastle?" he asked, pointing to her half-built mound. She nodded slowly. Then she turned and walked back without a word, looking over her shoulder once to make sure he was following. For the next hour, Ethan sat in the sand, building crooked castles, digging tunnels, and feigning astonishment every time they buried a toy and discovered it again. The girls didn't say much, but they didn't wander far. They handed him shovels. They giggled when he made animal noises. They pointed out birds and demanded he guess their names. It wasn't connection. Not yet. But it was something close to a beginning. Clara watched from the bench, her arms loosely crossed, her face unreadable. But every now and then, she smiled. Not because she wanted to, but because she couldn't help it. When it was time to leave, the girls hugged each other goodbye, as they always did. As they walked away, Gracie, Clara had texted him, turned and waved to Ethan. It wasn't a big wave, just a small, tentative one, as if to say, "You passed the first test." Clara didn't speak as she buckled them into the car. It wasn't necessary. The way she looked at him as she settled into the driver's seat said more than words ever could have. "You're not forgiven. Not yet. But maybe you're not a stranger anymore." Ethan stood in the parking lot long after the car drove away, watching the sun filter through the trees, and feeling, for the first time in years, as if something inside him was waking up. Not guilt, not regret. Something better. Something he hadn't felt since before he lost her. Perhaps it was hope. Perhaps it was love. Or perhaps it was the beginning of becoming the kind of man his daughters would one day run towards instead of away from. Earning trust. One day at a time. During the following weeks, Ethan began to show up regularly. At the park, at the library where Clara used to take the girls for story time, and sometimes simply outside their house when invited, sitting on the porch steps with a bag of coloring books or small puzzles he had chosen himself. He never showed up unannounced. He never stayed too long. He let the girls lead him, and Clara watched closely, not like a test, but because she didn't know how to stop watching him. For someone who had once shut down so easily, Ethan was becoming kind, intentional, present. At first, the girls treated him like a new neighbor. They asked cautious questions, often through Clara. They were curious about his car, about whether he liked frogs or strawberries, about whether he could tie his own shoes. But as the visits grew longer and more consistent, the tone shifted. Ethan began to become a regular fixture, not quite a father yet, but something more than a visitor. They laughed louder when he arrived. They ran to show him their drawings. They climbed onto his lap without asking, and told him nonsensical stories that made no logical sense, but lit up his face like sunrise. Then came the conversation about legal rights. Ethan didn't bring it up. Clara did. They were sitting on her back porch while the girls napped inside, the baby monitor softly humming between them. A gentle spring wind rustled the curtains behind the screen door. "You need to be on their birth certificates," she said clearly. He blinked it, surprised. "I didn't expect you to say that." "I'm not doing it for you," she said. "I'm doing it because they'll start asking questions soon. Real questions. About where you were, why you weren't there, who they are. And when they do, I want the answer to be honest." He swallowed hard. "I want to be there for all of that, not just the easy parts." She nodded. "Then prove it. Not just in court, every day." They filed the papers together. It was clinical, procedural. Signatures, identity verifications, a hearing with a family court judge who reviewed the documents and studied them both, as if they were barely holding on. But when the judge looked up and asked if either of them had anything to add, Clara spoke first. "I'm not here because I trust easily," she said. "I'm here because I've seen what he's becoming. And I want my daughters to grow up knowing the version of their father who's here now, not the one who walked away." The judge nodded slowly. "And you, Mr. Vance?" Ethan cleared his throat. "I made a mistake. I acted without thinking, without listening, and I've lost years I can never get back. But I'm here now, and I'll be here tomorrow, and every day after that, because they're mine, and I want to earn the right to be theirs." The judge granted his parental rights that day. There was no fanfare, no applause. But Ethan walked out of the courthouse with the kind of quiet, shaky breathing that happens when a heart finally restarts. That night, Clara allowed him to tuck the girls into bed. He read them a story about a bear who couldn't hibernate and ended up discovering spring. The girls snuggled on either side of him, eyes half closed, their little fingers wrapped around his thumb. When the story ended, Gracie asked him if he'd come back the next day. "I'll be back," he said softly. "Every morning." Clara stood at the doorway watching. She didn't say a word, but when he turned to leave, she reached out without thinking and lightly brushed his arm. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the first time she had touched him in 4 years, and that meant something. Something neither of them could explain, but both felt. Something real, something fragile, something beginning. After all that, do you think Clara should have given Ethan the chance to prove his innocence with the documents earlier? What would you have done? Share your opinion in the comments below. Redemption and a glimmer of hope. The rain fell with a steady rhythm that afternoon, tapping against the windows of Ethan's office as he stared at his computer screen. The city below was blurred in gray, and for once, work couldn't distract him. His thoughts were tangled with memories, ones he had pushed away for far too long. Almost 2 months had passed since the court had recognized his parental rights, and everything had changed. The girls now called him Daddy, without hesitation. They made him drawings and ran into his arms when he arrived. But still, something lingered between him and Clara. Something unresolved, and it gnawed at him, more quietly than guilt, but more deeply than regret. Later that week, Clara unexpectedly appeared in his office. She looked tired, but not upset. She walked in with a folder in her hand and a strange expression on her face, part hesitation, part resolve. Ethan stood the moment he saw her, his heart climbing into his throat. She didn't sit. She simply laid the folder on the desk and slid it across to him. "I found this when I was going through some old things," she said in a low voice. "It's from the night you accused me." He hesitated, then slowly opened the folder. Inside were copies of internal company memos, signed records, and a printed email chain detailing a technical error involving another employee. His eyes scanned the documents, and the truth hit him like a punch to the gut. Clara hadn't taken anything. The missing funds had been part of a miscommunication and an administrative error that someone else had covered up to protect their job. The evidence was there, clear and damning, not against her, but against the system he had trusted more than the woman he loved. His breath caught as he looked at her. "Why didn't you show me this before?" She crossed her arms, but not defensively. Her voice was calm, even. "Why didn't you ask? Why didn't you listen? And if I had handed you these papers that night, would it have changed anything?" Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it again. The truth hung between them, too bitter for excuses. "I kept them," she continued, "not to prove you wrong, but because a part of me always hoped you'd figure it out on your own." He sat down slowly. The weight of what he had done settled more deeply than before. This wasn't just about custody or rights or even lost years. It was about trust, the kind that can't be rebuilt with court orders or scheduled visits. It was about the moment he had chosen fear over faith in someone he once claimed to love. "I was afraid," he finally said. "Afraid of being wrong, of being used. I let that fear destroy everything." Clara looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, she saw the pain behind his composure. Not bitterness, not resentment, only a quiet exhaustion. "I had to build a life from nothing," she said, while carrying 2 babies. "Alone. Do you know what that felt like? To be accused of something unforgivable and have no one believe you?" "I can't fix it," he said in a low voice, "but I swear to you, I will never doubt you again." She nodded once, slowly. Then, after a moment, she turned to leave. Before she reached the door, she paused. "The girls are watching us," she said softly. "If we want them to know what love looks like, we have to show them, even if we're still figuring it out." Then she left, leaving the door gently swinging behind her. Ethan stood there for a long time, staring at the folder that held the power to change everything. If only he had bothered to read it 4 years earlier. But in that moment, he understood something he hadn't understood before. Redemption wasn't just about being present. It was about taking responsibility. Not for the outcome, but for the wound. That night, he didn't bring a gift to the girls. He brought a letter, handwritten. To Clara, not to apologize again, but to tell the whole truth. About his fear, about his failure, and about how he was ready not just to be a father, but to become someone worthy of the life he almost lost. What do you think of Clara's decision to present the evidence now? Was it the right time? Share your thoughts below and subscribe for more chapters of this touching story. A family in bloom. The 4th birthday. Summer arrived gently, and with it, a rhythm neither Ethan nor Clara expected to feel again. The girls now sought Ethan out as naturally as they sought Clara. Their days were filled with games and questions, and small rituals that made his presence feel permanent. He had rented a small townhouse just 10 minutes from her house, not because he needed it, but because he wanted the girls to feel he was close. Close enough to show up for story time, to pick them up from daycare, for the days when one of them woke up with a fever and just needed to be held. Ethan, once a man known only for his skyscraper offices and boardroom control, now spent entire afternoons assembling dollhouses, baking undercooked cookies, and singing terribly off-key lullabies. Clara, cautious by nature and by habit now, didn't resist his involvement. But she didn't give in too quickly either. She watched him with a quiet attentiveness, tracking his consistency, his patience, the way he responded to his daughters when things were messy, or loud, or simply human. She noticed how he no longer picked up his phone when he was with them, how he sat in tiny plastic chairs and listened to their nonsensical stories as if they were the most important words ever spoken. He wasn't playing at being a father. He was becoming one. Sometimes Clara would stay for dinner. At first, it was practical, a matter of schedules, logistics, convenience. Then, the time would stretch a little longer. She would help clean up. They would share coffee. They talked cautiously about the girls, about their days, and finally, in low tones, about the past. He didn't defend himself. She didn't accuse. They simply let the air between them settle with the truth neither had spoken aloud in years. One night, after the girls had fallen asleep in their matching twin beds, Clara lingered at the doorway. The house was silent, except for the hum of the nightlight and the soft sound of their breathing. Ethan stood beside her, his arms crossed, his expression soft and full of wonder. "She says she dreams of castles now," Clara whispered, nodding towards Gracie. "Big ones, with windows that touch the sky. I used to think all they'd want from me were answers," Ethan murmured. "But they want stories. They want stories." Clara turned to him, her face unreadable. "They want you, but they also want security, consistency. For you to be here, not just now, but always." "I will be," he said, "whatever it takes." She nodded slowly, and for a moment, the space between them felt less like a boundary and more like a beginning. Later that week, Gracie climbed onto his lap and asked why he didn't live in the same house as them. Her voice was curious, not sad, but the question landed deep within him. He didn't answer immediately. Then Clara, sitting across the room folding laundry, looked up and replied softly, "Sometimes adults need time to figure out where their true home is." Gracie accepted the answer, snuggling closer into Ethan's arms, already drifting to sleep. That night, Ethan stayed a little longer. After Clara tucked the girls in, they sat on the back steps in silence, the moon peeking from behind thin clouds. "I used to think love meant making grand promises," he said. "But maybe it's just about showing up, quietly, every day." Clara looked at him. "You're learning." "I'm trying," he said. "You're doing it," she replied. She said no more. But when she got up to leave, she didn't leave with the same cautious stiffness as before. Instead, she buzzed, looked back once and smiled. Not politely, not cautiously, but with warmth. And that small, unexpected smile stayed with him all night, like a door opening after years of being shut. The morning of the girl's 4th birthday dawned with golden light streaming through the windows and the sound of little feet thumping on the hardwood floor. The house was already filled with balloons, streamers, and the sweet scent of vanilla cake that Ethan had imperfectly, but proudly, baked the night before. He had never decorated for a party in his life, but now he tied streamers to chairs and inflated balloons until his hands ached. All because his daughters had asked for the most beautiful birthday ever. Clara arrived early, carrying a bag full of handmade paper crowns and a box of fresh strawberries. Her eyes lit up the moment she saw what Ethan had done in the living room. It wasn't Pinterest polished or perfect, but it was bright, joyful, full of care, and real. The girls came running in their birthday dresses, giggling as they twirled and demanded everyone look at the glitter. They both hugged Ethan first, then ran to Clara, showering her with kisses and tugging at her to help them put on their crowns. For the first time in 4 years, it felt like a family celebration. Not an arrangement, not a compromise. Real, shared joy. Guests arrived in waves. Neighbors, preschool friends, Clara's cousins, and even one of Ethan's oldest friends from college, who had flown in after hearing something big was happening in his life. The backyard transformed into a carnival of colorful streamers, face paint, tiny tables, and a bubble machine that ran almost non-stop. The girls bounced between their parents, dragging them into games, handing out stickers, and proudly announcing to anyone who would listen, "That's my daddy and that's my mommy!" Ethan noticed the way Clara laughed more freely now, the way her eyes lingered on him longer than before without tensing, how she no longer flinched at closeness or quiet moments. After the games, the cake, and the chorus of happy birthday, the children gathered in a circle on a picnic blanket, and Gracie suddenly stood up, holding a folded piece of paper. She whispered something into her sister's ear, who nodded solemnly. "We made a wish," Gracie announced, clutching the paper in both hands. "It's for Mommy and Daddy." Skye stood beside her and added, "It's super important." Ethan and Clara exchanged a glance, but said nothing. They waited. Gracie carefully unfolded the paper, and with the seriousness only a 4-year-old could muster, she read aloud, "We wish that Mommy and Daddy live together in the same house, so we don't have to say goodbye anymore." The yard fell silent for a moment. Some parents chuckled softly, touched, while others looked away to give space to something so personal and raw. Ethan's heart clenched. He looked at Clara, who was blinking rapidly, trying not to cry. Later, after the party ended and the last of the guests had left, Ethan and Clara sat at the kitchen table. The house silent again. The girls had fallen asleep side by side in an impromptu fort made of sofa cushions and blankets. Ethan held the wish paper in his hand, smoothing it with his thumb. "I didn't ask them to write that," he said softly. "I know," Clara replied. "It's what they want. And you?" She traced the rim of her coffee cup. "I never thought we'd come back from what happened, but seeing you with them, seeing you become this man, I think maybe we didn't lose everything. Maybe we just paused." He looked at her. There was no fear on her face, no distance, just clarity and something soft, like a quiet acceptance. "I'm not asking for everything," he said. "Not today. Just a chance to build what they see in us." Clara stood and walked to the living room, where the girls lay entangled in blankets, their hands still intertwined, even in sleep. She called softly over her shoulder, "Then maybe it's time we stopped living in 2 houses." Ethan didn't move immediately. He just watched her, his heart beating not with panic, but with something softer. Certainty. He stood up, walked to stand beside her, and together they looked at their daughters, the 2 tiny people who had pulled them from the abyss and, unknowingly, taught them to try again. There was no grand speech, no kiss, no cinematic moment. Just 2 people, standing close, finally ready to share the weight of the past and the promise of what could still be. It was quiet, and it was enough. This ending is powerful in its quietness. It doesn't rely on dramatic twists or a perfect reconciliation, but earns its weight through emotional growth, humility, and the choice to rebuild what was broken. Ethan's transformation isn't sudden. It's slow, real, and deeply human. He doesn't win Clara back with money or apologies, but with presence, consistency, and the willingness to own his past, without defending it. Clara's decision to let him back in is equally brave, not from weakness, but from strength. Choosing to forgive not because she forgot, but because she saw who he had become. What makes the ending satisfying is that it doesn't offer fantasy. It offers hope. It shows that people can change, that love can survive even through betrayal, and that sometimes the most unexpected second chances are the ones we're most afraid to want. The twin girls, unknowingly, become the heart of the story, not only because they represent a hidden truth, but because they remind both adults what it means to love unconditionally and believe in the possibility of healing. It's a silent triumph, and those, I believe, are the most enduring. Your interactions are very important to us. Leave your name in the comments, and we can include it in one of our stories with a special shout-out to you.